Hey everyone, welcome to the Renovation Theory podcast. We're trying to break down barriers through authentic conversation. We're your hosts. I'm Pat, and this is Britt.
Hey everybody, we are coming at you with a fresh review slash discussion around the Joker.
Yep.
There has been some controversy and opinions. It's comic book movie, but is it a comic book movie? And so we're going to kind of come at it from that perspective and just talk about maybe what some of the social implications of something like this could be. Oh, and by the way, consider this your spoiler alert warning.
For sure. We're not going to try to hide anything.
It's too hard to talk about the movie without ruining, or maybe not ruining, but just discussing what happened. So if you haven't seen it, this is your official warning.
So Joker came out this weekend, and it has made the most money in the history of films for an October release of a movie.
Yeah.
I mean, generally, there aren't big movies released in October.
Right.
However, opening weekend was huge internationally and within the U.S. for Joker. It made a lot of money, is gathering a lot of hype for a lot of different reasons.
Yeah.
There are a lot of critics that love the movie, and it was winning awards at film festivals. And there are also a lot of critics that are not a fan of the movie for storytelling reasons and for cinematic reasons. And then you add the controversial nature of the content of the movie and the issues that it addresses, and then you get more people who like it even more or hate it even more. And so that's what we want to talk about today is Joker. Is it too much? Mm-hmm. Like it was a dark movie. We went in, I went in expecting a dark portrayal of Joker, similar to Heath Ledger in, Batman with Christian Bale. That was a pretty dark Joker character.
Right.
So I expected something similar to that, only the origin story of Joker.
Right.
But I was not prepared for that movie.
Yeah, I mean, and one thing I was thinking of when you were kind of explaining the other backstory, revenue and everything is, Joker is one of those beloved anti-heroes, I think, mm-hmm. and has been. And so I think there's one aspect of like, it doesn't really surprise me because, I don't know, there's just something about the Joker that I think you can't fully hate him in the same way that you can other, like Dolores Umbridge always comes to mind as like she wasn't even like the ultimate villain, but you have to hate her.
Yep.
And so
that's a Harry Potter reference for those of you that don't know.
If you don't know, you should.
Dolores Umbridge is not in the Batman DC comic universe.
Okay, yes. Sorry, I went a little nerdy on you there. But yeah, so but there's something lovable, is maybe not quite the right word, but sympathetic or about that character. And even in the Dark Knight trilogy, where he's obviously has so many things that are, mental issues, we'll just call it that at a high level, that you still can't help but just feel for him and sort of root for him at the same time as you're rooting for Batman. And so I think there's always been kind of that interesting fascination with that character. I think that's part of the reason why Heath Ledger's version was so loved. So I think, that definitely goes into this piece, but I think you're right. I mean, I don't know if I was anticipating for it to feel so real.
Real is a really good word for it. It just the length that they held certain shots, mm-hmm. and just the way that it was filmed, and the way that there were so many shots that were just Joaquin Phoenix mm-hmm. as Joker, mm-hmm. whether it was a close-up shot of him as he's interacting with a therapist, mm-hmm. or sitting at a bench putting his clown makeup on, mm-hmm. or sitting in front of his TV in his living room. So much of the movie is literally just Joaquin Phoenix on camera,
right,
interacting with himself, basically. And there's not a big cast in this movie. The biggest scene is probably like a city bus basically, and that's
Right.
there's not a lot of even extras or anything like that.
Right.
But real is I wasn't prepared for the realness of it. And a couple of the reviews that I read from movie critics that didn't care for the story and character development and everything, they used that realness as a negative.
Interesting.
He basically said that the film, unlike Heath Ledger's Joker, Joaquin Phoenix's Joker was weighed down by too much realism, which, in my opinion,
Sure.
isn't a critique. That's what makes this movie so in your face, is the fact that it is real and you feel it.
Yeah, and I can definitely see where that's a criticism. More so, I would say, from the perspective of like, I could see if the question was, is this a comic book movie?
That's a big question that the reviewers were talking about.
I truly don't know the comic books well enough to know if how far we stray from the origin story of.
Very far from what I don't know the comic
Okay.
books, but from what I've read, first of all, Joker never really had that much of an origin story.
Okay.
So any origin story is basically making it up as they go. There are a few details from what I read about him falling into a vat, which made his face contort, vat of chemicals, which made his face contort.
Sure.
But they don't know.
Yeah. Yeah, and I think what was interesting was that even though the origin story isn't in the comic book, it felt to me, even though the tone was slightly different, well, the tone was different. Then, I mean, even Dark Knight was darker than other comic book movies had been before
sure.
that. I mean,
Yep.
So this is definitely a step in the darker direction, but I still felt like it could be a realistic version of even the Heath Ledger's version of Joker's origin story. Like, I could see where everything in that movie happened, and then it kind of led to almost a laissez-faire attitude about kind of the like step into the villain role. Like, I've been through so much, and this is, you know, in the movie he's talking about like, I've realized my life is a comedy. And so it's like that next step is to live life as though it's a comedy. And, you know, you see in the Heath Ledger thing, like how he, you know, blows up the hospital, and it's, you know, kind of a whatever, and he throws the detonator. And so it feels lighter because there's a jokey quality to it. And I could see where this heavy quality led to kind of this jokey quality in you know, a later version. Potentially, you know.
There was also the protagonist in
Right.
the
Exactly.
Dark Knight trilogy.
Yeah.
So you had good to outweigh the bad. And
Right.
there's just so much in Joker with Joaquin Phoenix that isn't good. There's no happy ending. I mean, there's no even glimmer of hope at the end. There's nothing. It's just real. It's just
right.
cringeworthy the whole time.
Right.
Is how I would kind of describe it.
Sure. And going back to what you were saying earlier about it being this like close portrayal of Joaquin Phoenix, and this like intimate was the word that kept coming to mind as you were talking.
Yep.
Of like, you know, kind of a like, I don't know if I want to be this close sort of feeling. Yeah. But they did such a good job with the relationship with the actress. And I don't even know if they say what her name is in the movie. I'm not.
Oh, the neighbor.
The neighbor, yeah.
Yep.
And using that to lend you toward him in the beginning, and then make you realize in a moment how crazy he really is. And I'm sure there's some people that probably saw through that, and, you know, definitely like I was questioning that, but I thought it was such a beautiful mechanism to show, like, to make you feel for him in the beginning half and kind of justify like he can't be that crazy. And then
they do spend a significant portion of the movie setting up everything and making him, he obviously has mental issues, and he's ordered to see a therapist because of it, a public therapist, and is on medications, and talks about that through some of the the therapy sessions, so you know something's not completely right mentally with the character. But you're right, they do a decent job of adding in enough human elements and close human interactions where you can feel for him. And I think that's ultimately what the movie was trying to do. You know, he is the protagonist of the movie,
totally.
You know, even though it is a dark movie. So they do want you to feel something for him. And then when negative thing happens to him and then another negative thing happens, like he gets, his sign gets taken away, and then he brings a gun to a hospital and gets found out and then gets fired. And then his therapist, they have government budget cuts. And so there's just this upon this upon this upon this. And so they want you to feel like he's just a normal guy who's on the edges of society with the mental struggles that he has. But anybody could get to this point. And I think that's what the film is trying to portray, which I think that's what leads to a lot of the controversy behind it. Like people are worried that this could inspire copycat killers. And anybody who feels the same way, seeing a character on screen that does something about the way that they're feeling. And so that's why there's been extra security at movie theaters. And when we got our tickets on the Marcus app, there was actually a warning before you even got a chance to buy your tickets that said no masks that cover your face or any face painting will be allowed at these showings. That shows you the time that we're in right now. And, you know, the history with the Aurora, Colorado shooting, which he wasn't dressed up as a Joker, but they're just trying to avoid any suspicion like that.
Well, I think where it crosses a line into, I think, dangerous or potentially dangerous for I think people have a hard time who don't see a movie like that and feel immediately maybe triggered is not the right word, but maybe vindicated or justified if that's not how you feel. If you walk away from a movie like that feeling like, oh man, that was dark, or I don't really understand what it's like, I mean, you're going to be the vast majority. And so I think a lot of people are going to watch that and just think, wow, that was really dark, or I've never really thought about it that way, and I can walk away from that and just walk away, you know, and you know, I don't think that those are the people that this conversation worries about, right? So I think what is different than anything that I've really seen is there is a definite feeling of payoff for the killing. And that, you know, obviously in a lot of stories of people who are, you know, serial killers or other things, like there is that release or whatever, but it is definitely like celebrated in this scenario. Like there's that scene in the bathroom when he's like doing yoga, I think. And you can just sort of feel like this coming into his own, and like,
I don't know if celebrated is the right word, but definitely glorified.
Well, it kind of contrasting it from like, even A Dark Knight, where it seems like there's a consequence to that action.
Sure.
It's seen as there's
a reward. There's a good consequence for
exactly. It. So that's kind of what I'm meaning. Like, not so much that it's like glorified necessarily, but that he, you know, he even says at one point in the movie, I was expecting it to bother me more, but it didn't, you know? So I think it is kind of held up as like a good consequence here point. And I think that kind of question, like in somebody's mind who already maybe has thoughts like these, if they could be held up to think, well, like, what if that's what I felt like after that happened? That's, I think, potentially really dangerous.
Well,
and
it's definitely dangerous. And it's definitely a conversation we need to be having around this film.
Right. So, you know, I thought this point that I was just reading here was really interesting. It says, Dan Brooks writes that the panic about the Joker is really a panic about moral ambiguity. Legitimate movies are about complicated protagonists who combine good and bad qualities. Superhero movies are about two guys, one good and one evil. By combining them into a single guy, won't this movie's cause dummies to think the Joker is good? To ask this question is to argue that nuance is dangerous. By fretting over Arthur Fleck's sympathetic qualities, progressive-minded critics are demanding the same sort of bright lines between good and evil that make comic book movies so boring. I think there's a lot there. I think, I do think it just begs the question of, not that we can't blur good and evil into one, but is that nuance dangerous? And almost by taking no stance on it, I think that potentially leaves a lot of interpretation. Throughout the whole movie, there's so much turmoil and cops are seen as bad. And I think it plays into all normal authority structure.
They do a really good job of making it's set in the late 70s, early 80s-ish, but they do a good job of making it feel like today without overtly saying, this is New York City, and here's a politician that is running for office, and here's the rich people. But it's all about the rich elite against everyone else who can't seem to get ahead in life, and then they band behind the Joker character and the killing that he did, and Michael Moore had a crazy Facebook. I shouldn't say crazy. He had an interesting Facebook post about it.
Okay.
In response to all of the controversy around it, he wrote this. It's as Michael Moore does. He gets super political about it and mentions Trump and a lot of the social political issues we're having today. But basically, he calls Joker a cinematic masterpiece.
Wow.
And says, the fear and outcry over Joker is a ruse. It's a distraction so that we don't look at the real violence tearing up our fellow human beings today. So he talks about a bunch of other things and how Trump's in the office and everything like that. He said, the movie is not about Trump. It's about the America that gave us Trump. The America which feels no need to help the outcast and the destitute. The America where the filthy rich just get richer and filthier. So you can see Michael Moore's point of view in it, but I tend to agree with his statement that the fear and outcry over it is a ruse.
Sure.
More so because when something this real hits us, we're used to going, especially to comic book movies, and not having to deal with this sort of thing. All we're dealing with is the good guy against the bad guy, and there's some cool fight scenes and explosions and everything.
Right.
There was no CG in Joker. It was all real life happening. And when that confronts you face to face, I can understand why people are like, nope, I'm out. I don't want to have anything to do with this. This movie is bad. It's evil. I don't want to touch this, and people shouldn't be watching this. We shouldn't be making movies that are this dark and this real. But I think that's just a knee-jerk reaction to us not wanting to examine what this movie is actually trying to say.
Right. Yeah, and I can see that. I think it definitely does go to sort of our programming a little bit. Like we talked a little bit about Infinity War and how there was this initial response to the ending of that movie, and sort of this like that's not how comic book movies are supposed to end, and that Thanos was the protagonist in that particular movie. And I feel like this is just taking that and amping it up to 1 million, and I think there's an interesting quality to that in the sense of like the storytelling and leaning into the underdog mindset, or understanding the lesser told stories, that I think is really important in the in the context of what he's talking about in a society where the marginalized voices are feel like they're getting quieter and quieter. Yep. So I do think his point is interesting, and I think you could also argue that you're politicizing something that maybe wasn't meant to be. So I think there's a counter argument for that too, that does everything have to be a social statement? And, who knows what they meant. I don't think they've come out and said, it's supposed to be a connection to our current situation. But obviously they felt like elements of the story were worth sharing in this context. So that has to be taken into consideration, I think. I don't think people want to make movie, I think there is an element of why now that a lot of people don't consider when they're talking about movies that make a statement. Like, there's a reason why a director and actors want to be part of a movie like this at a particular time.
Sure.
So I think you do have to take that into consideration to a certain degree.
I think you're exactly right with the why now question, but that also can go the other way. Like, why does a movie like this have to be so graphic right now when real life all around us is just that graphic with the shootings and violence and everything that's happening?
That's a totally valid question.
And I mean, as much as I stand by my statement earlier, that is a question that comes up in my mind. Like, I appreciate the film for art, and sometimes the only way we can have these conversations is when a piece of art, whether it's a song or a movie or whatever, invokes that emotion and gets us to have this conversation.
Right.
But is it too much right now?
Well, I mean, it is interesting, though, when you bring it up in that light. Like, is it, though? Like, how many times have we tried to have the conversation around the shootings, and those conversations aren't going anywhere, it feels like, anymore, especially in light of things like New Zealand and the shooting down there and everything that they've done in the several months since then
It took them a week to take action.
Right. And so, maybe there is something to be said in a social context of, like, how do we change that conversation? How do we go about that from a different angle? How do we get people to understand or see mental health issues in a more real way? So I think that's definitely something that's really interesting and worth talking about. I know you had brought up after we saw the movie. So what I thought was a very interesting addition, or I think it's an addition, is the laughing condition.
Yep. And
how that led, again, both kind of a sympathy, empathy to the role, the character, but then also a realness to kind of quirks that the characters always had, like the kind of high pitched laughter and whatever, and sort of made you feel like it was something that had justification, I guess maybe is the word I would use, and like that you saw the background behind the years of the history of that character that you've seen. But you brought up the bus scene, and how that really sort of made you feel that tension of, like, him just wanting to do something so normal for a little kid that all of us do, know.
So much of the movie was like systematic,
right?
Keeping him down, like the budget cuts, and he couldn't go see his therapist and get his medication anymore. Right. But there was the bus scene when the kid in front of him on the bus just turned around on the bus and looked at him, and Joaquin Phoenix, as a clown entertainer, made faces at him, and the kid laughed, and the kid was enjoying it. But as soon as the kid's mom she didn't even see what was going on. She just saw that this man behind her son was interacting with her son. She immediately said, "Stop messing with my son," basically, and just dismissed him. And that was the time when I go, it's not just like systematic keeping Joker down in this moment. It's how everybody treats people we think are weird or are in the margins. And I think they did a good job of making him feel pretty hopeless. And it just got more, there was less and less hope as the movie went along. Right. And then he thought he had some hope when he read a letter that his mom wrote to Thomas Wayne, Bruce Wayne's dad.
Right.
And where his mom said that Thomas Wayne was Joker's Arthur Fleck's dad. He's like, oh, this gives me some identity. This gives me something. Right. And so he went to approach Thomas Wayne, and only through, more negative circumstances and everything, only to find out his mom was also committed to a state hospital.
Right.
And that was all made up in her head, and it never happened. And Arthur was indeed adopted and abused by his mom's boyfriend when he was a kid, which probably led to a lot of the mental struggles that he encounters. Right. And so it's when you think it can't get any more hopeless, and then he finds a little bit of hope, and then that just all comes crashing down.
Right.
And that's the moment. There's the moment when he shoots the three guys on the subway, and he has that's a change moment where he's like, I can do that.
That preceded the bathroom scene that we were talking about earlier, where I think he really found release in that at that point he wasn't expecting. He hadn't experienced that before. But
at that point he wasn't completely hopeless. Like he lost his job and things were definitely very downhill for him. And then he finds out about his dad, and then not dad, and then his mom, and it's at that point when you see the Joker character come out.
Well, it is, because that is the moment he finds out about his mom immediately precedes the scene where he's in the bathroom dyeing his hair green, and you can immediately tell like he is a different character. He's like dancing in the bathroom, and I guess you see glimpses of that, like the dancing throughout different ways, with that freeness is kind of a theme that you see little moments of here and there, and it comes to a full realization in the end when he's got the full green hair and the full
nice suit.
The suit, and with all the different colors, and he's dancing down the stairs, and
that's the scene from the trailer.
And so I think that it's just kind of that little thread of like, I mean, the storyline throughout the whole thing is him getting little glimpses of like what he kind of calls in the movie is like his real self. And then like that full realization, and you see him smiling at the guy in the back of the police car with the clown mask on, and like he's definitely getting like enjoyment in the fact that he's created this movement. And so there's like this weird sense of, it's like a reverse character progression. I mean, it's the same character progression. It's him coming to this full realization. It just happens to be a backwards of, coming to their full good potential. It's more they're starting to see his full evil potential.
Can we talk about the movement that he created a little bit? That's the one thing that I'm not so sure about in this. It kind of reminds me a little bit of V for Vendetta in how one character creates a movement, and there's similarities with crowds wearing masks and
definitely
standing up to authority and stuff like that. But that definitely wasn't his intention.
No,
it was after he shot those three men in the subway, and the perpetrator, who they didn't know was him, was described as a man wearing a clown mask or a man dressed up as a clown.
Right.
And all of a sudden that movement exploded.
Yeah.
Like that seems like a big leap, and he definitely didn't set out to create that. That's one of the reasons why, as I think about it more, initially coming out of it, I go, wow, this is definitely a good origin story for the Heath Ledger Joker.
Sure.
But as I think about it more, the two characters are too different. Heath Ledger's Joker was planned. He knew exactly what was going on. He was the criminal mastermind, the evil guy. He had a plan, and he had backup plans, and had to make Batman choose, between the boat and the building and all that. Whereas, at least at this point, the Joaquin Phoenix Joker just stumbled into this.
And I think that's where like I could see that. I mean, because even if you take the timeline of the other movie, like let's say it's early 2000s, you've
got 20 years
right in between them. So I'm not, no reason to fight for that being the case. But I do think, to your point, I don't know if they were so focused on telling the Joker's story, Arthur's story, that I don't know if they fully got you on board with why everybody would be so mad. And I think they thought, well, just the fact that these guys were Wall Street guys was enough to kind of bandwagon them behind this figure. And I don't know. I think that's one thing that The Dark Knight does really well, is kind of show you the despair in Gotham a little bit better. And I don't know if they quite...
The overall despair, not just despair of one.
Exactly.
One guy and
yeah.
his
And I
mom.
think that if they could have woven that in a few more places, then you really would have believed that more mob mentality when it got to that point.
Do you think that movement accidentally created by him is something that could happen on a large scale?
Absolutely.
IRL?
I mean, I think we've already seen that in different ways.
On that large of a scale, though?
I don't know. I mean, I would.
How large of the scale is it? And
I would argue yes. I mean, just look at the destruction that happens when people win the World Series. Like, I mean, it. There's something weird about humans that, given whatever outlet of all these emotions, we turn to destruction. And I think, with the right or wrong economic turn, or,
murder in the subway.
Yeah, I mean, I think we're
Police shooting.
totally capable of that.
I suppose that's one of the things that the movie ends without any resolution. It's not like this mob of people that are stealing cars and ramming police cars with ambulances, and they find Joaquin Phoenix and he stands up and is loving all of the attention. It's not like that leads to anything at the end of the movie.
Right.
There's no, the mob did it and they overthrew the government and everything.
No.
There wasn't any resolution. So I suppose in that sense, it is what's happening whenever,
right. Well, and I think you kind of they do kind of close that loop a little bit with, he ends up in a psych ward at the end, and you see him escape. They kind of allude to the fact that he murders whoever's in there with him.
Yeah.
And then you see him kind of running back and forth, which to me, that kind of harkens back to almost like a Heath Ledger-ish, like kind of, it was the funniest moment or jokiest kind of in the classic, like almost Tom and Jerry-ish sense of this version of the Joker that you saw.
Yeah.
And
Tom and Jerry-ish.
It's just, I mean, I just sat there thinking, like, how did he turn around so fast? And like, I don't know. So that's just what it reminded me of. But that definitely had almost like a lightheartedness to it, more so than a lot of most of the rest of the movie. So I just thought that was kind of interesting as a way to end it, or they could have left it there. It was like white and bright, and, he's like kind of playing around with the guards a little bit and kind of leaning towards that, like, whatever happens, kind of, I could be planned, but it's all going to be a big comedy is kind of the takeaway that I had at the end of that scene.
Right. Yeah, it's just interesting. And I've been talking to a couple people about seeing the movie over the weekend, because a lot of people are talking about it.
Right.
And they're like, did you like it? Was it a good movie? And I honestly don't know how to answer that.
Right.
Because saying I enjoyed myself isn't completely right. Saying I thought it was a good movie isn't exactly right. But I mean, that's just because I was literally cringing 90% of the time in the movie, because not only is it real and they shoot it so well, and I think they tell the story of Arthur's depravity going downhill really well, but what's coming.
Right.
We know the Joker, and
right.
So as much as they spend like half of the movie just setting him up to be a normal-ish guy, at some point it's going to turn, and so you're waiting for one of these events to make him flip.
It kind of reminds me of in Inception, when they're like 3 layers deep in the Inceptions and the car is crashing, but it's happening at like super slow motion. I mean, that's kind of how the whole movie feels to a certain degree. But I know what you're saying about it being like, it's well made. It's interesting. I think it should provoke discussion. It's really hard to say that it's good, but it is. I mean, it's a fantastic piece of art.
Yeah.
And I think in that sense, you can't help but respect it. Whether or not you agree with it is a totally different question. But somebody asked me like what, my coworkers were asking me what I thought of it, and they're like, would you see it again? And I'm like, I don't think so. No. I don't think I would.
No. I don't think, I wouldn't see it again.
I don't know.
I would highly recommend that everybody see it.
Yeah.
If not in the theater, wait till it comes out and rent it at home, and leave yourself a little bit of time before going to bed to maybe watch a fairy tale or something to make up for it and bounce back. But
full disclosure, we watched Lego Movie 2.
Lego Movie 2, yeah. We definitely got home and needed something else besides that. But I would say see it, and don't see it alone, and have that conversation.
Right. Yeah, and I think that's a really important discussion. If you saw it, make sure you're talking about it with somebody, because I think there is a lot there that needs to be processed. And I think there's I think positive things that we can take away from it in discussion, and then things that could really kind of get at you if you just let them sit there. And so I think that's just, it is one of those things that's like, I think it's important that people are having the conversation around, what this could do to people, because I think that's real. And we probably should be having these discussions around more movies, and, holding up people around us to say, hey, are you okay to go see this movie? Or, hey, can I go with you? Or, hey, can we talk about it? Or whatever. We don't, I'm trying to think of what, I was watching Dear White People, and one of the characters in the show is subject of like a police discrimination, has a gun held to his head, and nobody ever asks him really like how he's feeling about it, but the whole time he's like dealing with PTSD, and they're like showing all these scenes. And I think sometimes we just don't check in with people on how they're feeling about things like that. And I think that's something, these types of art pieces they're meant to make it feel real. Mm-hmm. And I think if we don't,
because that's the only way to break through. That's one of the things that the director of Joker said, is we've become immune to comic book violence.
Totally.
And so he wanted to portray something real, but he claimed his representation of it was responsible because there were real world consequences for the actions that Joker took. And there were.
Sure.
He did get arrested and ends up in the psych ward for basically spilling his guts on live TV. But that's, it just shows where we're at. Mm-hmm. That the director had to make that statement, that Warner Brothers, I think it was Warner Brothers, the studio that made the movie, had to release a statement that said, we don't condone any of the actions in here. It's a weird thing for a studio to have to say that when you're making a fictional movie. I feel like that's built in to the fact that you're making a not real movie.
Right.
But when it feels so real, and they do such a good job of making it feel like that could be happening in Chicago, New York, whatever right now.
Well, I think it goes back to what we were talking about, though, that there's no like overarching force of right in this. And I think that voice usually speaks for like, we don't condone this. And there isn't that in this movie. Sure. So I think you're kind of, part of the intrigue of it is you're supposed to sort of make your own judgment call on how you feel about what he's doing. But I think
that's art.
Right. But I think that leaves people feeling uncomfortable. Like, it does say something to me that we need somebody in society to tell us like, this is a good action or this is a bad action. And, it's like, have we gotten too programmed to, Captain America and his righteous anger so that I can be like, oh, okay, this is the good guy, and it's like, no, you should leave that movie and feel like everything that he did was maybe justifiable, but also wrong. I mean, not everything in the whole movie, but ultimately in the end was wrong. And so I think it's just crazy that we've gotten to this point where we need somebody to tell us in front of a movie that taking lives is wrong, Yeah. So I just think that's kind of interesting.
Well, we would love to hear your thoughts on Joker if you've seen it. If you haven't seen it and have made it this far, not sorry for spoiling it for you. We gave you the warning right at the beginning. But if you've seen it, we would love to hear your thoughts on it. Check out our Facebook group. Just go to facebook.com and search for Renovation Theory. We've got a group there where we're having these conversations with more than just the two of us. Right. And so let us know your thoughts on it and how you see it impacting, culture at large going forward. And we'll also link to the articles that we mentioned and maybe a few others. There's a lot of them out there around this topic on our blog, which is on renovationtheory.com.